Thanks for
how's it
showing up.
going?
Thanks. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's so good to be chatting with you here today. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you. It'll be fun to like geek out about, all these things that we enjoy geeking out about. And I would also just be excited to hear what you've been up to since graduating. And I know you have like a very diverse set of experiences, and it'll be fun to like, explore those through the lens of you deciding to pursue them. Um, And well, thanks for being here. Why don't we get started and like go back to like a young impressionable Sydney when you were deciding what college major to pick?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's funny. I knew about Simpsons before I even before I knew that I got into Stanford. It was sort of I think my sophomore year of high school. I had discovered. I think I was on like some Wikipedia binge, and I ended up some way somehow discovering Simpsons. And I don't even know if the website's the same anymore. But back then, it was like very basic HTML. Like very
Yeah.
like I just remember the logo, seeing kind of the old Simpsons logo, the symbols connecting, and I reading about it. It just seemed like the perfect intersection of my interest at the time, because at the time I think I was trying to determine. I was kind of in a weird war with myself because I had grown up. I had grown up kind of focusing on creative pursuits. I was really interested
Hmm.
in photography, writing, big into creative writing, big into poetry, big into. I really thought that I'd end up majoring in English, doing something completely humanities focused. And actually, every school that I applied to, except for Stanford, was a small liberal arts school. And so
Wow.
Stanford was kind of like my long shot school. And I thought, if I get in, maybe it's a sign I should pursue this other, or at least kind of like look into or indulge a little bit into the side of me that feels a bit more drawn to technical topics. So I
Hmm.
also, the other side of me had been, since I was like, I want to say like 3 or 4 years old, I had been fascinated with computers. I remember that I had, I wanted to play with the computer so bad. My dad got me a mouse that was basically a yellow ball that you just press because I was too small to
Oh, that's
navigate.
so funny.
Yeah, and I think like around I when I discovered the internet, it just opened a whole new world for me. I could search whatever I wanted. At the time, it was like, what I was interested in was like Scooby Doo, or like whatever thing I was interested in at the time. But I remember just exploring, and I remember when I found out I could view the source code of a website, I got enthralled. I was like, wow, this is, you can see how the elements I'm looking at on the page are connected. You can see, I like it, just sort of that ability to look behind the curtain, I think, was kind of enthralling. And for some reason, I just felt this interesting kinship with the kind of technological aspect of it all. And I remember when the internet would inevitably go down, and my dad would go into the control panel on our old Windows computer, and troubleshoot and show me what he was doing. I just became so fascinated with that. So it was kind of a weird. I didn't see how these two interests really intersected, and so I didn't know which path I'd end up taking. And I kind of told myself that if I got into Stanford, given that
Hmm.
Symbolic Systems, was a completely unique to Stanford major, I felt like it might be a sign that I should go down that route. Of course, it didn't happen right away. I still tried a bunch of different things. I looked into product design. I looked into kind of like they had an English and CS major my freshman year
Hmm.
coming out. I looked into anything that kind of blended those interests, but then what eventually happened was I became involved in the Simpsons community, kind of almost by accident, and just the people I met kind of
Hmm.
solidified the decision to really go for it. I just felt like this is a community I wanted to be a part of, and I felt like the people that were involved in the community were my kind of people. I felt like they were
Hmm.
very intellectually engaged and curious about the world. And they were interested in technical topics, but with a creative slant. It seemed like
Hmm.
Simpsons people kind of have also that internal push and pull in themselves, where they have kind of the techie side and the fuzzy side, and this in Simpsons was the perfect way to blend those interests. And so I just felt I felt like the emphasis was a bit more on intellectual curiosity than say a pre-professional feel, or just sort of that's what kind of drew me to synthesis over, say, the computer science major. And so I hope that answers your question. That's kind of how I fell into synthesis.
No, that definitely covers it. I was just at the Simpsons reunion that happens every year last Friday, I think, and the first time in a while that I'd been, and it was just like the refreshing feeling of like these are my people. Like, like immediately somebody was asking about like I don't know, like Gödel's proof or something, and then immediately like electricity
Yeah.
took on the conversation, and yeah, and you're right. I mean, like I did not know anything about Simpsons and both my parents are computer scientists, so I thought I was going to be very much a computer science guy. Um, but there was something about the why of it all that was like looming, and it took like a bit of convincing, but I finally was like, oh no, this is the discipline, if that is even the name for it. This is like the field of study that I want to pursue.
Mhm.
But also good on you for not being daunted by looking at the HTML and then being like, oh, this is interesting. The first time I saw HTML, my dad tried to explain it to me. I was like, I do not understand a thing. Um,
The irony is now I don't you web dev is my least favorite part of anything
uh-huh.
programming, but at the time, just the ability to change the CSS of something, and like, kind of fiddle around and poke around with the JavaScript seemed really fascinating, because it was directly influencing what you saw on the screen. And but yeah, completely. It's one of those things, and I think that what always keeps me coming back to Simpsons, and just it kind of goes back to the idea of or I should say that what I find particularly compelling is that everyone is in. It seems that there's a lot of intellectual curiosity to be had in the major, but also in the topics.
Mhm.
You get very far-ranging topics that all come together, like ranging from how complexity theory influences human biology.
Mhm.
I remember learning about how ants communication between ants influenced how, for example, like phone lines were created and put together, and how they
Mhm.
communicate, and just like kind of ways in which you take an example in the real world and kind of translate that and map that onto another use case. I found very fascinating, and it's all because I think that the people who are interested in these topics are interested in a lot of different topics, and interested ultimately in seeing how everything connects. It's just a very
Mhm.
compelling, and it just reminds me of that feeling of looking at the source code on a computer and thinking, oh my gosh, like there's something here that shows me how everything I'm looking at, this world I'm looking at and get fully engaged with and immersed in, is connected to. There's a connection here to this larger world, and so
Mhm.
um, that sensation, I think, is very compelling.
Mhm.
Uh,
It's my favorite feeling in the world. And well, let's talk about some of the creative stuff because I knew that you were creative, but I guess I didn't know you were that into the creative side of things. Met you, I guess, after you were already a part of the community
Mhm.
when we met. So like, what were some of these creative explorations? You mentioned photography, you mentioned writing.
Mhm.
How did those play out in your life?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I still to this day wonder how much of it is connected to the intellectual side of me. I do feel,
Mm,
when I say intellectual, it's I guess I mean the side of me that got so enthralled with the source code, for example, or was
mm,
interested in how computers worked and were connected. Because to me, the creative side of me feels almost more, I want to say spiritual. It just feels like there's my favorite poems are. Ones that kind of get the kind of transcendentalist in a way, and
mm,
get kind of and reflect, to kind of turn back to nature and use kind of natural metaphors to refer to the kind of larger themes in life.
mm.
So like
What are they, if you don't mind me asking, before we?
sorry, like who are some of my favorites?
Yeah.
um I love Ralph Waldo Emerson. I love I love anything ranging from so you kind of have like the Ralph Waldo Emersons of the world, who kind of write about like the earth laughs loud and flowers, but you also have kind of uh for example, I spent a while studying haikus when I was in middle
Hmm.
school and high school, because the idea behind a haiku and kind of you see this a lot in East Asian writing and literature is haiku are centered around a natural there are elements of nature in each haiku, and of course there's the standard format of like 5 syllables, 7 syllables, etc. But another kind of component of a haiku is that it makes reference to nature and the
Hmm.
simplicity of it, I think. And so these are kind of themes that I really took to. And it's not that I necessarily always write poems that have to do with nature, but I think throughout my life, I've been most fascinated with how people, I think topics of, like similarities between various religions or comparisons between religions and nature, and even just like nature in its simplicity. Reflecting something larger in life. I think that's always I found it compelling because it feels grander than myself in a way
Hmm.
that feels a bit less reachable than the feeling I get when I'm studying aspects of computers, because there I feel like, oh my gosh,
Hmm.
if I spend a lot of time here, I can learn how this is connected too. But there's an element to the kind of poetry that I like that says there's something here and I may not know it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean it doesn't
Hmm.
surround me. And I find that more so in it's enthralling in a different way. It's kind of more
Hmm.
like reassuring. And
Hmm.
so I don't know if that answers your question at all, but it does feel like there's a very different part of my brain or something that means a lot to me that I'm accessing when I'm doing something creative on my terms that's
Hmm.
different from when I'm, for example, programming or pursuing my
Hmm.
technical interests, which is interesting.
And what about so with writing? I feel like I could imagine there being like more similarities between writing and writing code, where and I've felt this when like creative writing, um, it's like there are some parallels to writing code. Like there's like a runtime in people's minds, and like you're sort of playing with the state, and
Mhm,
evoking a certain set of emotions or an emotional arc.
mhm,
Um, but with other stuff, like other multimedia stuff, and I feel this with music too, but I don't like,
mhm,
for some reason, my synesthesia doesn't extend to something like
mhm,
photography or VR, which I know you are also like involved in. So how does that side? So VR, for example, is a great example of like both
mhm,
worlds colliding,
mhm.
and photography is like a more alien example to me. How do those work?
Um, yeah, I think there's or I guess would it be about like what leads me to one interest over the other, or sort of how the technical and creative side blends?
The interest first, and maybe we get to the how they
Okay,
blend later.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, that's something I've always wondered. I think what I'm particularly interested in is when I was a kid, for example, I had kind of, I guess, what I'd call some sort of maladaptive daydreaming, where I if I watched a movie that I really liked or a show, it didn't even have to be that I liked it. It just had to be something I could play with. I felt I had this urge to go run and be alone and create a world, like continue the story, I should say. So I
Mm-hmm.
ended up creating all these characters that in worlds, often based upon what I had just seen on the screen. But sometimes were completely new creations based on what I was interested in, what kind of characters I wanted to interact with, and how I wanted them to interact with each other. And so I think I liked mediums that allowed me to play with that. So I'm really interested. I Writing was just, the second I got into kindergarten, I was drawn to the books. I went to a Montessori school, so you had an
Mm-hmm.
option of what you could do. You could play with like they had these cubes where you can use to count. You learned the alphabet, then you moved on to reading books, and then you could like they had like an iron. There was actually kind of like
Like
there's
hose.
some
That's so funny.
like you can iron your clothes. I was like, wow, they really trust us preschoolers. But and then you could like wash and polish a cup, and I did all those things. But the second I picked up a book, it was all I wanted to do, to the point where my
Mm.
teacher, who I'm actually still in touch with, shout out to Martha Winters. She sends me a
Mhm.
birthday card every year.
That's so sweet.
And she's amazing. She To the point where she was like, "Yeah, you need to stop. You need to do something else besides reading." But I was just really drawn to the story, so I was drawn to the words, in fact. And
Hmm.
so anything that has to do with language, I find myself really compelled by and drawn into. So that encapsulates anything that has to do with writing. So creative writing, science fiction is creative writing, but
Mhm.
poetry, like short fiction. I really like writing sonnets. I like the
Mm.
structure. I find the structure
Mhm.
really compelling, which I think is another aspect that relates to the computer science interests in me.
Mm.
Yeah, and I like science fiction. I like imagining worlds and like playing around and see what would happen if we change one thing here and there. The photography, I think, is probably just gets back to an enjoyment of aesthetics, and it's
Mm.
just kind of like the most accessible way for me to approach that. I love the idea of having a beautifully designed home someday, or
Mm.
but I feel like with photography, it feels more accessible to go out and have a certain aesthetic in mind and try to capture it and kind of play around. And it's another element of when we do photo shoots, thinking visually, oh, this would be really cool if we could bring this to life, and capturing that in a photo, similar to how it might be in writing a story. Um,
Mhm.
so those have been my main interests, and I think it's interesting because I think the VR interest probably relates more to the technical side, the side that kind of
Mm.
got immersed in computers from a young age and virtual worlds. But it also does blend in the kind of the daydreaming aspect that I've long had. So yeah, that's probably where it comes from. I'm also curious to
Mhm.
hear more about your synesthesia, because I don't have synesthesia. I've heard of it, and I'm curious how that manifests in someone who has it.
I don't know if it's like full blown synesthesia. I think I felt it at times, like
Mhm.
the visceral translation of one thing to another. But I think I intellectually have mapped certain patterns in certain fields to certain patterns in
Hmm.
certain other fields. Um, like the concept of tension and release in music maps pretty nicely with tension and release in stories. Um,
Mhm.
and and leitmotifs, for instance. I think that was a big breakthrough for me. You know, every time Darth Vader shows up in Star Wars, in the background you hear the Darth Vader theme. Uh, and so then, there's like these symbols that we can map to emotional states that we can redeploy and reimagine and reinterpret every time, but that build on the previous stuff that has happened before. And there's
That's
some like aesthetics to it. There's like some, but like I've always thought about it like more in terms of like the math and geometry of certain things.
wow.
Um, so in terms of like musically, you can very easily compare two notes and see what the ratio of the frequencies is. Um,
Mhm.
and then that'll give you some information. Like some ratios sound better than others, and some sequences of ratios sound better than others. And they map and like this is one of the great mysteries of life to me is that like they happen to map universally across architecture, across like even weird things like acoustic, like I guess it makes sense, acoustics.
Mhm.
So these ratios that sound, I guess maybe it just now I'm thinking pretty obvious, but like if this ratio of wavelengths sounds well in music, if the room that the music is played in follows those ratios, it'll amplify the nice sounding,
Wow.
frequencies and harmonies and whatnot. Um,
Wow. I have never heard of wow in aspect. Really cool to hear an example of it that
mhm.
is so geometric. That is really interesting. Yeah.
Totally, and then that unlocked the whole rabbit hole for me of like, okay, geometry and sacred geometry, and like these proportions show up in like these ancient texts, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what have we figured out?
Oh my
Um,
gosh. Well, now
and
I'm wondering, is
even
that how you got interested in Simpsons, or like in kind of
um,
the Westerbach of the
yeah,
world?
definitely. It
Mhm.
was a. I was always drawn to this type of stuff, like the interconnecting tissue that connects everything.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until I felt confident enough. in the program as a serious enough, uh, rigorous enough program that I would be like, okay, I can dare to take this leap of faith that was for me at the time. And as I was like teetering towards the decision, I took 103, which was, theory of computation and complexity theory,
That's
and like,
fun.
so great. And so then I'm like tripping out about infinity and like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then I also read Gödel Bach that quarter over winter break. And that was the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, this is it. This is definitely it for me. And then there's the formal course of study that we follow. That is, in my experience, my curriculum was very technical. It was all like AI stuff and like very programming heavy. And then, well, I guess, and I ended up pursuing an engineering career, so it made complete sense. But some of these other pursuits were a bit more like hobbies, DIY type of stuff, where I would be like, okay, and I like music, so I couldn't like ever give that up. And so I was always trying to find like, how does music relate to my real life. Uh, and that was kind of a driver for me. And but I don't know. I mean, like, I think these things are, and the reason I asked you about photography specifically is I also never studied aesthetics formally. Like, like we get exposed to theory of mind, we get exposed to um, philosophy of language, we get exposed to linguistics and language development, language centers of the brain, like cognitive stuff, but never actually thought about aesthetics or visual aesthetics as a discipline. So I was going to ask you, like, my sneak in question was, did your exploration of philosophy or like these things help enhance your innate, I guess, like theory of aesthetics, or just disposition toward aesthetics in photography or VR?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because if I really think about it, I don't think I'm naturally very good at applying aesthetics the way that I know some of my friends are, or some people who I know who are um, photographers are. I think what I like about photography and what drew me to it was I just think there's this space in between human interactions that I think is very magical, and I think that at the right time, if you really kind of like stand poised, you can sort of capture some of that and bring it to light. That's why I think it's funny, the photography I end up consuming a lot of. I mean, maybe it's because I got married 2 years ago, but I go down rabbit holes every now, like literally last night I was going down a rabbit hole where I just find random wedding photographers and just go through their feeds because there's something that I find really compelling about seeing genuine interactions. This is a space where someone who everyone that this person has ever loved is in one spot, and they're marrying the person that they love, and you get a lot of very nuanced and generally positive human interactions out of that I find pretty magical. So my interest in photography has always been kind of more portrait style. I mean, when I go on a
Hmm.
vacation or something, I'll try to, take a nice picture, or, but try to frame it in a certain way. But I'm really interested in capturing the elements of, I'm interested in capturing living things, I should say, and how
Hmm.
they interact with the world and capturing the interactions that occur. So, in a weird way, maybe it goes back to the idea of why I like to write in a way more so than I realized before, because it's about the interactions and it's about that sort of cause and effect that occurs, and where we go from there, sort of. It is kind of an interesting topic to me in the larger sense, and so um, I think that is actually more so prominent in my interest in photography over aesthetics. So I've never formally
Hmm.
studied aesthetics. I don't even think I took a philosophy class on it. Um, and I know that when I have tried to apply some teachings, I have felt that it muddled my interest, my
Mm-hmm.
natural interest in photography, which, to be honest, my interest in photography is more of the level of a hobby. If it were my
Mm-hmm.
career, I think I would have to apply some more formal techniques. And um, so that's something I learned as I got older and went through school. And that's another reason why I ultimately decided to make my career on the more technical side rather than the creative
Hmm.
side, because I didn't feel like my interest in the creative arts were aligned with the things I would need to do to be a professional in the creative arts.
Hmm.
Um, it would kind of mar my natural interests. So, uh,
Oh, totally. I resonate with that 100%. My relationship to music is like sacred to me, and so I don't want to put it in the past, so that I don't want to like ever change my relationship to it because it's so special.
Mhm.
And we also just went through the process of picking our wedding photographer, so a lot of these things, are like very pressing in our lives. And like it ends up like, you're picking somebody whose vision is going to represent the happiest moment of your life. And so like
Mhm.
then you get into like, oh, wait a minute, and then I found myself sort of at a loss in terms of like the language to describe certain things that I wanted or certain things that I didn't want. So it's just
Mhm.
like very much like, okay, Pinterest, like a lot of stuff, and like this kind of
Mhm.
vibe works and this kind of vibe. Um, so that's why, and then I mean, like, I've been trying to get a cheat sheet on aesthetics, because like this just feels like something that I haven't really figured out just yet. Um, but you also remind me of one thing that like was a perfect blend of both things. Like a couple days ago, I saw this presentation by, do you know Procreate, the app?
Mhm.
So they just announced a new product called Procreate Dreams, and the announcement is one of the most epic announcements of any product I've ever seen ever. And
Oh
it's
my
like
god.
you should check it out, because the way the guy describes, the relationship between the artist and the machinery, the art, or like software and machinery that the artist uses to create. He says like this needs to not exist, or like very seamless, like the artist can't wait for the computer has to surrender to the artist. It's like he dropped these lines that sound so epic.
Oh my gosh,
uh,
that sounds amazing. Oh my gosh.
um, okay, so then that's on the creative side, and now we can start like getting toward the creative side, and now we can start like the technical side a little bit.
Mhm.
So you there's like this notion that, oh my gosh, the source code is the thing that powers the thing that I'm using, and I can tweak the source code and I can edit it. How did that play out as you were actually, getting into the more serious computer science classes, and like, um, following, that track,
Really
which
did
is
feel
pretty
it's
intense?
funny, a lot of the things I've loved and drawn to, and maybe it's like this for most people, but I was drawn to things that I felt like were a part of me or reflected a part of me that I had like deep inside in a weird way. And so I felt it seems weird to say I felt a kinship with the computer because that seems weird. It makes me sound like a cyborg, but hopefully
It's
it's
okay. You can confess to being a cyborg. I don't think.
resonates. I know. Yeah, that's the real reason I took some sis. No, but I think there was an element of when I started taking the classes and going that would ultimately lead to the career path I'm on now. So kind of the more computer science technical classes. I think I took some like math classes as well. I think I took advanced linear algebra. I think I did not do well in that class. And a bunch of philosophy classes. I think I ended up minoring in philosophy actually. Um, which I still consider to be under the technical umbrella, at least sort of
Hmm.
the ones I took, the more analytic style philosophy classes. But I think that there was kind of another war that occurred internally where this was no longer this was leaving the feeling of, oh, this is, this resonates with me, that this is natural to me, and more the feeling of, okay, this is, someone else's brain is good at this, but it's not mine,
Hmm.
like writing out proofs using all sorts
Mm.
of different lemmas and like axioms to come to a conclusion, and step by step, like that was not I mean, I have an ADD brain, and I, not to say that you can't have ADD and be good
Hmm.
at that, it's just that my particular form of brain was not good at it. I'm not good at going piece by piece and
Hmm.
drilling in. That my brain is kind of like a laser, and if it wants to focus on something, it'll be like a fire hose. If it doesn't want to focus, you can't get it. You can't get it
Hmm.
there. So that's the kind of war I had when I came to really detailed work, which is often required of you in these kind of in these computer science courses. And so I think it became less about this. I mean, it's not that I was dispassionate about it, but it became less about pure passion and more about I want to understand this. This is I've reached a point where this is not that this is not coming easily to me. I'd like to see if I can reach a point where can develop a method that would make this come more easily to me. And that I found that just as compelling, weirdly enough, as doing something that came easily to me.
Hmm.
And I found myself kind of my passion towards what I was doing when I was staying up late writing a linear algebra proof wasn't there. But I found myself enthralled by being surrounded by people because around the people in your classes and the people who live with you. I lived in the dorm house house mit for 4 years, the German or 3 years, the German house at Stanford. So it was a house, and I a lot of for whatever reason, a lot of the people in that house were computer science majors. So we took a lot of classes together, and being surrounded by and having friends that were like explaining these topics to me and just the way that and observing how their minds worked as they figured things out. And it got me it was sort of like passion by proxy. It was really I found it really compelling. And I also I became I think it goes back to sort of my interest in how different minds work, different
Hmm.
um, sort of the different pathways people take to come to a conclusion or come to an answer, and how someone can arrive, how two people can arrive at the same answer in completely different ways. And so I think I just found it compelling, and so that's kind of what because I never stopped finding it compelling. It just kind of led me down the path
Hmm.
until I reached a point where I started to feel more confident in thinking critically about technical topics, and being a little more detail oriented in my day to day. It's still not my natural strength, but I do believe I've developed a method that works.
Hmm.
It's sort of like, I don't know, like building something in addition to what you already had, as opposed to uh, recreating what you already had. Um,
Can you
so
can you give an example of what that means? I think I like.
Yeah. So I think now, so for example, in my current job as a machine learning engineer, a lot of what I have to do is very much, something's broken, go fix it. And usually it's, at least on my end, it's an infrastructure related issue. Or if it
Mhm.
is an infrastructure related issue, usually I have to kind of go fix it because most everyone on my team is focused on the machine learning aspect, the data science, and building models aspect, but only a few of us are focused on the infrastructure aspect.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I so usually I'm looking at kind of the logs and looking to see what failed, and then tracing each step, and figuring out,
Mhm.
and then going into libraries and like on GitHub and sort of figuring
Mhm.
out, okay, this failed because of a version mismatch, or this, but kind of piecing together, going from one step to another, rather than just kind of thinking, because I think what I had to learn was how to solve a problem where you have to. I felt that I can solve any problem as long as I had all the information already. It was hard for me
Mm.
to know what to do in cases where I had literally no idea what to do. Like where it
Mm.
required looking something up and like understanding how things were maybe connected on the infrastructure side, or how AWS services were connected, before I really understood AWS. I'm having to know what to research and how to understand how those processes worked and put those together, I think were difficult. Whereas something that I found that if I were to like approach, like for example, a logic problem,
Mm.
all the everything I or one of those like brain teasers where they give you the
Mm.
problem and you just kind of have to think of it in the right way, and then the answer is kind of clear to you after a while. I liked those, and I felt motivated by those because all the information was there. You just had to keep thinking about it until you got it. Whereas in the real world, in something breaks, you have to learn a bunch of disparate topics and put them together to try to figure out and to see the bigger picture. And so, and then you have to be able to also follow a trail of logic step by step on top of that. And
Mhm.
so, just those kind of methods, I think, or ways of knowing that that is how to approach these problems. I had to really like um, uh, assume into my arsenal and kind of
Mhm.
learn how to do that. If that makes
And it's fun. No, that makes total sense. I thought it was funny that you said like I'm not naturally like very detail oriented, but you were basically you were doing DevOps stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's like the most detail oriented thing I can imagine.
sense.
um,
I remember
and
being in
then
college and having something go wrong and think like on in the terminal or something and thinking I will never do, you can't pay me to do this stuff for a living, and here we
Uh-huh.
are.
Yeah, there you go. And you also said something that I have my own journey with, like realizing just how technical philosophy is, and you
Hmm.
bundling in philosophy with this stuff, right? I think at least the flavor of philosophy that we got exposed to is super rigorous and super logical, and I guess it's just very much part of the analytical tradition.
Hmm.
It wasn't until much later that I discovered like continental philosophy, and it's just like, for lack of the crudest way to describe it, it's a lot more vibey than
I love
than yeah. So it's just about the feeling that you get, but it's still very informed and still like very like. But I wanted so if you minored in philosophy. What drew you to philosophy, and what parts of philosophy were you into, or are you into?
I think it went back to what I just described, where it was just the way I think I've always been fascinated. You know, when you're kind of drawn to people who are different from you,
Mhm.
I've been drawn to people who can break down topics into easy, understandable explanations. So I love ChatGPT. I love asking it
Mhm.
explain how radio waves work, like I'm a golden retriever, or like I'm a 5 year old or something.
Mhm.
But I like people who can do that. I like people who can take something that seems so incomprehensible and make it understandable. And I think my favorite philosophers um, did that. And I think my favorite philosophy teachers I had did that.
Mhm.
On the by the same token, I found myself really fascinated with really hard to understand philosophers like Wittgenstein, for example, Ludwig
Oof.
Wittgenstein. He, I don't know if you've ever read his Tractatus, and I think he renounced it later as like complete BS, but it's really fascinating to read. It's, it's all a bunch of propositions like the world is all that is the case, and it's like, it keeps going, it's just endless, and they're just like, and then he writes this like completely like so difficult to like wrap your head around what the heck he's saying, but you just know that there's something like buzzing underneath of it. And then he completely, I mean, I don't know if he completely renounced it, but he by the time he got to like fill his his later book, he was just like, yeah, no, I don't know what I was talking about. And so I think there was that too. I think it was kind of this combination of I loved being able to have talk. I loved new perspectives. Honestly,
Mm.
I think that
Mm.
was kind of at the root of it. My favorite philosopher of all time is John Stuart Mill, and I
Mm.
loved so he's a I guess he's a philosopher in a few different realms, but he my favorite one of my favorite books I've ever read. Well, I have it in a combination book here on my bookshelf, but it's his take on utilitarianism, and his book on liberty, and those
Mm.
combined I thought were extremely compelling books that I think touched on all the things that really mattered to me. And I thought that I really saw him as someone that was trying to find the right way to create a just society. And I found it very compelling. And he was essentially in his utilitarianism. He's there's kind of I think the original view of utilitarianism is the Jeremy Bentham method, which is a bit more
Mm.
like like maximize utility and like kind of less
Mhm.
like consideration for. I mean, I don't want to generalize here, but it's a little. It's thought to be a little less considerate towards humankind. Whereas John Stuart Mill, I thought, did a beautiful job of saying, actually, there is something here. But here, let me reframe it for you. And I just thought it was beautiful when I read it. So he's my favorite. And
I
do you have a favorite
Oof.
branch of philosophy?
Branch of philosophy. I don't
Or
know. Or philosopher. Um, I don't know if I have a singular one, but I love. Um, I think I don't. He's not really a philosopher, but he like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Have you
Oh
read?
yeah, I read that
Uh,
book in like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, I want to read. That's on my list to reread. I love that.
it's so good. I mean, and it touches on all kinds of philosophy and like in a very delicate way. Um, I love Socrates.
Mhm.
I've recently gotten into Neoplatonism as a philosophical like philosophy school, and it's been incredible. I think it's like the perfect blend of the things I'm interested in. I like Rawls, like his justice, the ideas behind his justice theory. Um, I used to hate moral philosophy. Now I love it.
Yeah,
But I'm ever more confused about it. So I
same.
don't know what that. And I used to hate theory of mind, or I guess philosophy of mind.
Mhm.
And now I love theory of mind. Uh, and
Yeah,
what else is there? Um, I guess ethics, justice, theory of mind, moral
yeah.
philosophy of language. I mean, I love everything. I guess. I mean, I just like they're all so great. Um,
I love it.
there are things that I enjoy thinking about more than others, though. I think I like thinking about the meta stuff a lot more. Like the
Metaphysics is compelling, I think.
yeah,
It's like,
totally. Just like what can yeah, totally. Just like based on what we see, I think it's just really like it's about the source code like doing binary bomb on reality just
yeah,
by using it. And so I think that I love those type of pursuits.
I love
Um,
that. Yeah,
and
I
okay,
love.
now that
No,
we've
sorry.
established that your favorite philosopher isn't Lil Wayne, um, what is so then but then also you didn't just like lean toward the technical side, you fully leaned into it. So like instead of you pursued a very technical engineering career. um,
Mhm.
how did that play out, and how did your first job align with sort of the expectations that you had been building academically over time?
Which they
Sort of the
basically they're known kind of for their conda distribution in the Python world, which is a package manager. But they also had the thing I worked on was the Anaconda Enterprise like tool set that they use for their enterprise customers, and it basically is an easier way to access like to create data science projects and use the conda distribution and Jupyter Lab and all these different kind of
expectation.
it's basically a large tool set that makes it easy for enterprise customers to kind of get started with their own data science projects. That's where I started. I think for me, and I'm trying to remember what led to this. I think at the time, I again was at a crossroads. I was wondering. I was choosing between trying to work at a think tank and ending up kind of the
Mhm.
ProPublica route where with data journalism. I took this class called data journalism at Stanford, which was probably one of my favorite classes ever. It was taught by Dan Wynn. I think he's still there. He might not be. He might be somewhere else now. But he put all the course material online. I think it's still there last I checked, and it's what I send people when I'm trying to get them interested or when they're interested in Python and or learning how to program and don't know where to start. Because for me, I had taken, the quintessential, introductory CS courses at the time, and I'd even taken a few like web applications classes or classes like web applications and like probability for computer scientists and different things at the time. But when I took this data journalism class, I think I finally understood how programming could be fun, or at least
Hmm.
relevant to my interest. Because it like as cool as 106B was, I don't think like like recursive backtracking applies in a lot of real world relatable situations. And I think that it also doesn't really apply in real world situations in my job to this day. So, I mean, it
Yeah.
depends on what you do, of course. Um, but what we did in that class was we, for example, this was during the Trump Hillary election. And so we were performing, he would have us as homework perform tasks where we scrape website government related websites, or analyze a data set of tweets and parse it, perform sentiment analysis, or count how many tweets Donald Trump says something, or how many times he mentions Hillary, or figuring out where in the metadata it says whether Trump or Hillary was using an iPhone versus an Android, or just
Mm.
kind of different. You at least kind of saw a sliver of how it could be applied to the real world. And in this case, it was sort of gearing one up to go into something like data journalism. And I think that Dan, the teacher, had worked at ProPublica and had done data visuals for ProPublica, and so I thought that was really interesting. I had used some of their visuals. They had some really interesting ones. I think they had a really interesting pollution tracker that kind of showed different. What different parts of the U.S. might be affected. They had a lot of stuff that I found fascinating at the time, so that's kind of one route went. And then I started working in the same lab, the communications building. Discovered the virtual human interaction lab, which
Mm.
was the VR lab at Stanford, where you program on. At the time, it was only the Oculus Rift,
Mm.
and you would I'm forgetting the name of the software used, but you would essentially program virtual worlds in Python for the Oculus Rift. And it was for psychology experiments. So the graduate
Mm.
students would have, for example, a thesis or a theory that people are more empathetic in VR
Mm.
if they're exposed to certain situations. So the thing I worked on was specifically an empathy study. It was, we're going to create this world in which you live your life as a homeless person. You go through you go through a scenario in which you lose your home, you're living in your car, you're defending your belongings, and there's certain elements that make it difficult to move up and out of your situation. And so we created this as an experiment, and then we took it to like the San Jose Tech Museum and had actual people experience it. And so that was really an interesting way to apply an interest, like human interaction, one's interest in my interest in humans interactions, to a real world, some programming that had real world
Mm-hmm.
consequences. And when it came time to apply to my first job, I was still kind of in the realm of like, I really like what I had done here. I really found these
Mm.
experiences rewarding, this kind of these applications of programming. And I was either going to go to the think tank route or a software engineering route, depending on what accepted me. And I went the software engineering route. And I think I mean, I can't say that I regret it because I never think, "Oh, what if?" But at the same time, I also do like it. I mean, I really enjoy what I do now. I'm now a machine learning engineer, so I ended up deciding that I enjoyed software engineering, but I wanted to try data science, and then I ended up a machine learning engineer after that. And I really do enjoy what I do, but for a very different reason than I enjoyed what I did back then.
Mm.
And so it's interesting to reflect on that.
No, yeah, totally. And what was the types of engineering that you did for Anaconda? What types of stuff did you do?
Yeah, so it really ranged because they had a bunch of kind of out of the box data science projects. Sometimes the classifier would break. I think at one point the classifier was always classify. You could put any picture in, and it always said that you were a panda or whatever you're classifying was a panda, and that's because of some default situation that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
fixed. But that was a problem that had to be gone and fixed. Other times, just general um, debugging aspects related to Docker or Kubernetes,
Mm.
or like anything related to the actual API that was underneath the hood, and just general kind of bug fixes, adding in environment and variables where
Mm.
customers wanted them. kind of things like that. So it was kind of like a crash course in all that because I didn't. My Simpsons education was a little bit nebulous,
Mm,
just by my own doing, and I didn't have formal. I didn't take CS 110 or 107 or the courses that would have made me a little bit more. Um, I wouldn't even say necessarily 107 would have made me more prepared for that kind of work, but
mm,
I didn't take pure software engineering classes, so it was all just
mm,
kind of new and kind of um, I don't know, just like it was enthralling in its own way because it was being launched. I like being launched into situations where I have to learn fast,
mm,
and I have to learn a lot of things fast, and so it kind of I found that part compelling. But it was very different than what I had found compelling about computer science in the first place, I should say.
Hmm. I see. Um, and I'm guessing at this point, Python up and down, top, bottom, like pretty well. And we didn't have like a good Python. Like it was like very hacky Python. Like connect these two libraries together and you hope it kind of works. It wasn't till industry that I sort of had to learn a bit more about the deeper, like the lower level things about the language. Um, yeah, and DevOps is this whole crazy world that, can be very frustrating if you're not detail oriented. Like me, I know that I'm not necessarily very detail oriented, and so that was Anaconda. And then, so how does one go from there to machine learning engineer?
Well, I got laid off
Woohoo!
after woohoo after about a year, I'd say, and there was like a big layoff, and um, I at that point I was ready to try something new anyway, and so I applied to a company called OpCity at the time, but they were acquired by Realtor.com, and I had talked with my coworker from Anaconda because there are a lot of people I really loved from Anaconda that I still keep in touch with to this day, and one of them, my friend Matt, he had worked as a software engineer and a machine learning engineer or a data scientist at different times, and he gave me kind of the pros and cons. And he essentially said that in his experience in data science, you're a bit closer to the customer. I felt very
Hmm.
divorced from people as a software engineer.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it depends on the company and the role you're in, but that kind of me thinking of that as a possibility was like, okay, well, how about I give this a try? So I reached out, I started applying to data science jobs, which in hindsight, I don't even really know how it worked out because at least in my job, I kind of got lucky because I think if my current boss had interviewed me, I think she would have seen like, oh, you don't have a master's, you should, you're
Hmm.
not qualified for this, and I definitely was not, and probably still am not, to be honest. Um, but at the time, they were. I was applying data science jobs, and this company, OpCity, was like, we're looking for a data science engineer who basically has experience with software engineering, but is interested in working with infrastructure, so kind of that DevOpsy stuff, but is also interested in learning how to model and like do the whole life cycle from exploratory data analysis to building out a model, testing it, evaluating it, and productionizing it. So
Hmm.
I was interested in that. And then I joined and I did that. I basically wondered how to avoid getting fired for a year. And then the pandemic hit, and then roles were kind of changed around so that everyone was a machine learning engineer on the team. So I
Hmm.
kind of got like I kind of got swept under the cracks into a full on data scientist somehow. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of where how I'm here now, and I honestly really like it because I think there's always something to learn. I think that it's definitely a very engaging field, an interesting field, and it gets down to the core my core interests more so than my last software engineering job did. But it's also a lot less stressful. Like I don't have to
Hmm.
be on call. I
Hmm.
Our deadlines are like month. It's like, okay, you have 2 months to build a model, rather than you have 2 weeks to figure out this how like build this API. It feels, and again, this is all very bit dependent on your job, but
Hmm.
that's been my experience. I don't know if you had a like I don't know how fast paced your previous work was, or like if you felt like it was stressful or if you had to be on call, but um,
I had to be on. It was I had this really weird mix of experiences. I was at two teams at Google, and the first team was ads, and that was very um, machine like, but sometimes in a good way. You know, everything is like a process and it's figured out, and like the metrics are all very clear and sort of like it's and it's also very scientific. So you're always like taking looking at metrics and you're seeing like, oh, this metric we can improve. People brainstorm ideas for how to do it, and you implement a feature, and then you roll out a small experiment that then you grab metrics for, and then
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I was really impressed by the machinery of it all. um, and at times I felt like detached from it because it was a machine. And like there, you're in these longer cycles, like essentially like maybe year long planning cycles where um, sort of like your schedule is kind of predictable for about in like 1 year increments, which was kind of nice. But also, there are periods where the rhythm drops and you want to keep on pushing, and like I found that was there was a bit of tension there. And then I moved to I and it was an environment that I was fortunate enough that I could know how to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I was able to do well there. I got promoted, thankfully, and then I moved to a very different team that was like a startup that was acquired by Google.
Oh, cool.
um, and so it had way more of a startup-y vibe, and everybody was doing a bit of everything, and there were on-call nights, and I even had to like set up the alerting system for any production failures that happened. And so I was the guy who was running the pagers for everybody.
Oh my
um,
god.
and well, we'll set up the automated pager system, and that was really fun, and also like great in the depth, or sorry, the breadth of experience, but somewhat limited in terms of the depth of experience. Like whereas in ads you could build a whole. I mean, you could do an entire career in ads, getting really specialized and getting really good at this one type of user behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Here there was a bit more of a like, okay, what is the vision that the product's trying to enact. And it was also in this really interesting org chart situation where it was trying to find its home. Um, and so it was just really interesting to see all that play out, and sort of me as an agent navigating sort of like, okay, life choices around that. But and very different skill sets too. Like, the ad side was very much a full stack engineer, front end, back end, connect the two, and then run the experiment. And the I was in an AI role for the other team, and so it
Mm-hmm.
was a lot more figuring out essentially how to drive better results for what the app was super cool. Actually, it was um, Socratic. So
Mm-hmm.
you took a picture of homework and it helped you solve it. So it gave you either resources or step by step recommendations for how to do it. And we launched in August 2019. So it was 2019, August 2019. And so it was like 6 months before, remote learning became, the talk of the town.
Wow. Do you
Yeah.
think that helped the app, the whole the fact that everyone went remote?
I'm sure it did. I'm absolutely positive it did. And the app did really, really well. So I think the reason I asked you like what type of engineering it was is because like it can take on so many different shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you could be doing full stack. You could be doing database stuff. You could be doing analytics and running queries all the time. You could be doing um, more like data science on the exploratory side. You just deal with notebooks. You don't want to deal with production stuff. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and all the way to serving, which is basically like you're not touching the models anymore. You're just like figuring out how to package them, and like building the Docker infrastructure that goes on to Kubernetes, and all that crazy stuff. Um, and and it's a fascinating world. I mean, like it really is. You engage a lot of your brain in it, and it takes a lot of your creative power uh, to thrive in it. Which leads me to my next question, which was you. open the door to the idea that like when you want to learn something new, you want to build something and you want to like try it out as opposed to rebuilding the thing that you got. So what have you been doing now that that fulfills that interface?
That's a very good question. I guess I mean it's funny because this is probably a completely different answer than would be expected, but I feel like I'm in my nesting phase in life, and maybe that's why I
Hmm.
keep looking at like why I'm suddenly interested in going down the rabbit holes of weddings, which I had my own wedding 2 years
Hmm.
ago. Really, different elements of just family life because now we're in the stage where we're thinking about kids and we're thinking about what that'll look like, and it opens up kind of a whole new world for me that kind of almost goes back more so to my creative side because it goes back to the idea of the vision, the
Hmm.
vision being um, the vision being important to have more so than ever before, but like the vision manifesting as like a projection of what this world in which you're responsible
Hmm.
for children should look like, and what kind of figure
Hmm.
you can be in the world, not even to them.
Hmm.
I mean, I really like there's this book called The Prophet by I feel like I'm gonna mispronounce his name, Khalil Gibran, and he has this. I mean, the most beautiful. I'm gonna print it out and put it on my wall someday. Passage on children, but it's sort of like, and I won't recite. I have the whole thing memorized, but I won't recite it. But
Hmm.
it's just because I wanted to memorize it. And I really thought it was important to me to do it. But it essentially the first few lines are, your children are not your children. They're essentially a manifestation of life's longing for itself, and they come like through you. They come. Oh gosh, now that I'm live, I'm forgetting it already. But they're essentially not a part of you, or they come through you, but they're not. They do not belong to you. And I think that's really important. I think for me to remember moving forward. And so I think this is a very like weird way to answer this question, but I feel like what I'm building is sort of the idea of the kind of person I want to be in the world moving forward.
Hmm.
Now that I might be bringing in
Hmm.
these entities that rely on me, and how I can be kind of service to them, because I don't want to. I'm really trying to divorce myself from the notion of being someone that like molds them, or that they
Hmm.
should be like me in any way. I think that they should be who they are, and I have to figure out how to navigate being someone that allows them to be who they are. And so I really think that I know this doesn't sound like something I'm physically or like actually building, but I do think that this is an involved process that I've been trying to engage in for the past few years, after we made the decision of that we'd want to have children, because I want to. What I feel like I'm curating is a vision. It's a
Hmm.
vision, a
Hmm.
projection of what life will look like, or can look like, or the
Hmm.
path I think that will go down. And I just want to make sure that I understand what this vision is, or
Hmm.
what it entails, and I want to make sure that I have an understanding of my own,
Hmm.
I guess, philosophy in life, and what is important to me and what matters to me for this purpose. So, in a weird way, that's kind of what I'm focused on now. It takes up a lot of my mind share, and it's important to me. But I guess that's kind of what I'm curating in alongside what I have and what I've already
Hmm.
built throughout the years in these different realms when it comes to career and just general
Hmm.
interests. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, totally. I mean, I think that's awesome. I think that like, and I think it's a way more like if you set out to do it in earnest, like a goal like that, it is a lot more involved than it would seem at first glance. I think it like I don't know what it is. The busyness of the modern world maybe just makes us think that this is like the type of thing that you think as an afterthought, as opposed to like the central driving thing. But if you set it as the central driving thing, it turns out there's a lot of stuff that you hadn't figured out about your relationship to the world.
Mhm.
including or even the world, just like even your relationship to your own philosophy, which may be non-existent at the time you set out to do it, right? Like these are
Mhm.
the things that I value. These are the things. This is the rough ranking order of how I value things,
Mhm.
and this is how I you look at the data and you're like, oh, this is how I've been subscribing to these values. Maybe uh, in all likelihood, way more imperfectly than I would like. Um,
Mhm.
but I think in a position like you're in, which I think is like a wonderful, beautiful stage in life, where you're like, okay, the stakes are about to get a lot higher. Um,
Mhm.
I think it's remarkable, and I think very important to figure out that relationship, and it does affect everything else you do. It affects the career path you take. It affects a relationship with other people, your relationship to your local environment, um, the language that you use. I think that's like a super tricky one, um, and I think it's awesome and very different from the answer that I was expecting. That was like your LLM hobbies.
Oh, yeah, there's also that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I also would love to touch on that too because I mean I think that working on LLMs. Well, I guess it's kind of a in some ways I wonder if it's a controversial thing to be so excited about because I mean there is a very real possibility that people's jobs can be taken by AI, and that's the reality of the situation, and people can be affected in ways that are kind of unforeseeable and possibly catastrophic. And I don't want to say probably catastrophic, so I'll say possibly catastrophic.
I like
Uh,
that. Yeah.
and yeah, but I have to admit that the project, maybe it's the projects that I've been working on. I work for a friend's company, sort of on the side, that allow like essentially people come to his company with a desire to incorporate AI into their idea or their existing company, and then we build out using it's projects involving LLMs essentially, and so we build out what that would look like. We build out a demo, and so we build out the basically the minimum viable product using LLMs, and then we typically demo them on a Streamlit dashboard. And or just some other way to get across the idea of what the potential of the project. And then if they want to continue working on the project with us, then we actually build out the infrastructure around it and like bring in external services like as needed. So like Microsoft Azure, or like we deploy on Heroku, and
Mm.
just different kind of things like that. So but I gotta say, I think it goes back to another reason why I was interested in VR, and the reason why I was maybe interested in computers way back in the viewing the source code days, was that you put something out there and you get an immediate response. It's not
Mm.
like modeling where you wait 2 hours for numbers to come out and then hopefully those numbers give the company more money somehow.
Hmm.
It's like you literally like you give it a prompt, and you try to craft the prompt a bit. You set up a vector store. You work with whatever data source you have, and you just kind of let it fly, and you get to see the tweaks you make have real effects in real time, and just the power behind them is incredibly fascinating. Anyone who plays with them finds it's immediate, the power behind them, and so I gotta say it's very compelling. Very compelling stuff.
Okay, can you share one of these specific examples of like one of the projects that you're working on, or is all top secret?
I'm sure it's not top secret, but I'll try to be vague. My the project that I thought was interesting recently is essentially a fashion project where the basic idea is that you could, um, given a selection of assets, we'll say that it's in like a CSV file or something, you say like dress me up for going to the beach in February, and it filters down and outputs an outfit based on that.
It's
Um,
got to be
and
pretty warm if it's a February. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so you
Pack your
got
layers, yeah.
exactly. You gotta make it catch the nuances. Um, I think what's fun about it is seeing how wild you can get with the prompts. Like I want an outfit for being a ghost traveling chasing rats in the subway in New York City. Just like completely random stuff, and just seeing what it comes up with and trying to like understand why it came up with why it did. Um, and I think that sometimes with this project it's been interesting because it's sometimes clear that the LLM is able to sort of almost manifest a sense of humor in an interesting way. And I don't know, it's just a really interesting, fun experience.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, I think the number of people who haven't played with this stuff is rapidly decreasing, but for those that haven't, I mean, it really changes your perspective. Like when you see humor pop up that makes you laugh, that I think we're like in brave new world territory where it's like, oh my gosh, these things, I think things are about to get super crazy, like super,
Yeah.
super, super crazy. As
Yeah.
all these things connect, right? Like I think, like even in the tour of this conversation, we've gone from like aesthetics to writing to VR to engineering, and I think this is just jet fuel for all of it and the connection between all of it. So you'll have AIs that are creating virtual worlds that are designed for our mental health, and then they'll be doing the philosophy that they're going to teach us through humor. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
If they choose not to exterminate us.
I
Um,
know. I know. It's scary stuff. It's like, I mean, it's the unknown, I should say.
yeah.
It's a lot of it is so unknown.
Actually, maybe that's like a great question to end on. Like you're working on AI stuff. You've been working on different facets of AI stuff. Now you're with your LLM project. It's like the most um, customer researchy type of experience with AI so far. Um, Knowing that AI is sort of like this potential existential threat to humanity as you're considering these big, the vision changes in your life. How does that all come together? Um,
Yeah. I think, well, it makes me nervous that my husband and I are putting all our eggs in one basket because he's now pursuing a master's or about to pursue a master's in computer science currently with the intentions of being an AI researcher. I mean, subject to change, of course,
mhm,
but that's kind of his interest right now, and it's what he spends a lot of his time researching. I'm fully in this career path. I don't see myself going back to software engineering per se. Um,
mhm,
and I find that the most enthralling aspect of anything related to, I guess technically I'd consider what I'm doing software engineering, but essentially
mhm,
I find it anytime I can work with LLMs is an exciting fun time for me in a way that I just don't get in other facets of day-to-day work. And so I don't know. But it's so we're in kind of an interesting stage in our career paths where um, we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know. Right now, I'm trying to what I'm trying to do right now is just not take on any projects that I can see an obvious way that it'll harm people or take
mhm,
away other people's jobs. I don't think that I think that this sort of work is by no means a moat, or like knowing how to do it
mhm,
just does not make you a moat. And so I think that
hmm,
it's I think ultimately it's important to be someone that is conscious of the potential harm they may be doing, and it's important for people with that mindset to be in the field. And so I'd like to strive to be someone with that mindset. Um, and then hopefully if the time comes I could I can know what the right thing to do is and have a set of values or just kind of like yeah I guess a set of values going into it rather than something going wrong and then thinking and then scrambling and saying, oh, how should I behave in this situation? I think that it's important to um, it goes back to the idea of wanting to know what is important to me now in this stage in my life. I think that it's just very important to have a clear sense of that right now.
mhm.
um, yeah, I guess I'd leave it at that.
Amazing. No, that's great. Sydney, thank you so much for your time. This was
Thank you.
awesome. I'm glad we did this.
I'm so glad it was so great catching up with you,
Yeah.
and you asked some great questions, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Well, we should do it again sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely.
All
All
right.
right.
Have a great rest of your week.
You too. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.